Guten Tag und herzlich willkommen im Literaturhaus Berlin online. Mein Name ist Sonja Longolius und gemeinsam mit Jannika Gellinek leite ich das Literaturhaus Berlin. Wir begrüßen Sie sehr herzlich zum Europäischen Feiertag. Letztes Jahr haben wir noch unter dem Motto Political Dreams gefeiert, vor Brexit und natürlich vor Corona. Seitdem ist sehr viel geschehen in Europa und nichts davon lädt eigentlich zum Feiern ein. Die humanitäre Katastrophe in Moria, die Tragödie in Norditalien, Orbáns Notstandsgesetze, die Justizreform in Polen, die Schließung der innereuropäischen Grenzen und so weiter und so fort. Warum also sollten wir heute am Europäischen Feiertag dieses fehlerhafte Europa feiern? Weil es unser Europa ist, an dem wir bei aller Fehlerhaftigkeit festhalten wollen, um es zu einem besseren Europa zu machen. Aber es muss eine andere Art Feier sein als sonst. Diesmal keine Getränke aus 27 Mitgliedstaaten werden wir anbieten, sondern sie dazu auffordern, gemeinsam mit uns an Europa zu arbeiten, sich mit den Defiziten Europas auseinanderzusetzen und diese aktiv zu verändern.
Es geht jetzt also nicht von ungefähr gleich los in Englisch mit einem Gespräch über Arbeit an Europa. Der gleichnamige Verein hat uns exklusives Material des Zeitzeugenprojekts European Archive of Voices zur Verfügung gestellt, das Gespräche von europäischen Intellektuellen, Kulturschaffenden, Politikern und Politikerinnen versammelt. Gleich unterhalten sich jetzt darüber die europäischen Autoren und Autorinnen Simon Strauß, Jeanne Pansard-Besson, Erle Sørheim, Hamen und Kristof Magnusson über die literarische Form des Interviews, über die Verbindung von Literatur und Europa und warum es Europa auch in diesen Zeiten zu feiern gilt. Später am Abend wandern wir dann noch mit Schauspielerinnen der filmischen Lesung von Thomas Köcks Paradies Hungern durchs leere Literaturhaus Berlin. Bleiben Sie also bei uns an diesem langen Abend Europa. Experimentieren Sie mit uns und den neuen Formaten, die wir ausprobieren. Arbeiten Sie mit uns an Europa, damit wir auch nächstes Jahr wieder mit litauischem Schnaps und schwedischem Blaubeersaft im Großen Saal des Literaturhauses anstoßen können. Viel Spaß und einen schönen Abend.
Thank you very much, Sonja and Jannika, for the introduction, and thank you very much for having us here. Very honored to be at Literaturhaus Berlin online and to have the possibility to give a little insight in what our project could mean and different faces behind the project. My name is Simon Strauß and I'm a writer and journalist for the FAZ, and I co-founded the Association Arbeit an Europa in 2017. Very briefly, to explain the background of this, the Brexit decision was the key moment basically for this association to come together. Different people from different backgrounds, I would say, in political terms, they all came together in the interest and passion for a European answer to this. So our founding moment was Brexit, and we were since then trying to work on Europe in a way that explains Europe different to what we see every day in the media, in the news. So it's not so much about economy, it's not so much about daily politics, but it's more about the cultural aspects of Europe. That's what we're interested in as an association, as Arbeit an Europa. And our core project has been since the beginning of last year the European Archive of Voices. And the 4 participants you can see here who are joining me are all part of this European Archive of Voices, and I'm very, very happy that they found the time to now in the next hour give a little bit of a background about their experience and also about their specific take on the theme of an archive. They're all writers. I will introduce them in a moment, and they have all a very specific point of view from which they look on Europe and the cultural dimension of Europe. So I will just lead a little bit through this discussion, and I hope it will be interesting for you. Below the stream, you can find the interviews. So something we have done just for the day, just for the Literaturhaus and the Europäische Feiertag, that we give for the first time, actually, an insight into these interviews. They will just be visible for this day, for this evening, and then afterwards they will be again postponed. Basically, we will then display all of the, in the end, 50 interviews we'll have in this archive project in autumn. Together with the Goethe Institute, which is a very important partner in this. So let me start the discussion and let me briefly introduce our panel guests. So I'll start with Erle on the left corner. Erle is Norwegian, and she's a literary critic and writer with a master's degree in philosophy, studied in Oslo University and Potsdam. And she's written 2 books. First and foremost, a guidebook on Berlin, where she's based right now, in 2015. And then a non-fiction book, very interesting non-fiction book, which was published in 2017, called Til Berlin Faller, so about Norwegians in Berlin during the Second World War, and their special identity in this moment. So she's living in Berlin, but mostly works in Norway. We have met, when I remember correctly, through this Norwegian connection. And right now she is working on a book about political cartooning in the wake of the Charlie Hebdo killings. So very great to have you, Erle.
Thank you.
Down on the right from you is Jeanne. Jeanne is French. She's originally from Paris, and now she's based in the UK. She works as in opera and film as a director and a writer, and she also was also based in a very different world, I would say. Before that, she holds a PhD in classics from the University of Cambridge on the imagination of Rome's foundation myth. So a core theme of the European identity, maybe. She has been dealing with that, and she has also been a guest of one of the last Arbeit an Europa meetings in Slovenia. So very, very honored to have you on board. Next to Jeanne is Samuel. Samuel is born originally in Luxembourg, but has studied extensively in Heidelberg, and is a very, very renowned literary critic, I would say, a freelance writer also, who has, from his studies in Heidelberg, also written a lot in German, literary critics in German, very, very detailed literary critics in German, but also has been came to the public as a writer. His debut novel was published in 2018, only in Luxembourgish so far, I think, but we still hope for the German translation. And then, since then, he has published short stories and poems, and in autumn this year, hopefully, he will be a fellow of the renowned literarisches Kolloquium in Berlin. Great to have you here, Samuel. So last but not least, next to me on the left from your point of view is Kristof. Kristof, who's born in Hamburg and is a trained church musician by training. Worked for the NGO Action Reconciliation Service for Peace during his career at the time, and specifically with Holocaust survivors. So the question of witnesses and archive maybe is very dear to him. He studied at the Deutsche Literaturinstitut in Leipzig and the University in Reykjavik, and he writes highly acclaimed novels. I think he just finished one, and he also writes theater plays and is working as a translator and is also living in Berlin. So we have a great mix of different nationalities, different point of views, I hope. And so I will start with the first round of questions, starting with Erle, where I will all ask you to, for the public who are watching us, to very shortly introduce your Europe witness, so the person you interviewed for this archive project, very shortly introduce him or her, and then give us maybe one insight, one most impressive moment you have in mind right now when you look back at these interviews. So Erle, please start very briefly to introduce your witness.
Yeah, my time witness is Karin Krog. She's one of Norway's most prominent jazz singers, and I was just so happy when I realized that I could be allowed to interview her, because that's kind of a dream. She's a big star. She's kind of a diva in her own right. She was born in 1937, and what's always made me admire her so much is that she's a feminist icon, but not necessarily in the way that she's talked a lot about feminism. She's that in the way what she has done. She's a pioneer. She just made her own band and started out her own career in the 50s, not asking anyone if it was okay. She just has done her whole own thing the whole time. And in the 70s, she even made her own, founded her own record label, like way before anyone else did that. So, yeah, I thought it would just be a great honor for me to be able to interview her. And she said yes.
And when you look back at the interview, when did you conduct the interview?
In August last year.
In August last year. So a different time, obviously, different mindset still. But what can you remember, like a passage or a moment during this interview where you really were struck and you had this moment of impression?
Yeah, well, it was impressive, all of it. But of course, I thought it was extremely interesting to hear how they were traveling around Europe during the Iron Curtain, like how they went from GDR to DDR, and how they had to change currency all the time, and how to get to Poland and Czech Republic, how difficult it was, how much that kind of things is just so fascinating. Because of course I can remember that a bit. I was still quite grown up in 2001 when the Euro came, but still, when to hear someone talk about all of that and all of the difficulties that we didn't have anymore in August last year, that was very fascinating. And then, of course, I have to say also that Karin experienced the bombing of Oslo during the Second World War, and that always a chilling moment when you hear she remembering that as a little child, how that impacts you, and how she still remembers it so well. That's always that's also very strong and impressive to hear about.
Yeah, thank you, Erle, for this first insight. So we then I would then ask Jeanne. So we have the jazz singer and feminist icon Karin Krog, and then we now come to maybe one of an icon of the film world, one could say, Jean-Claude who was born in 1931, who is one of the leading French film writers, you could say. How did you get up with this idea? Why did you want to interview him? And also, what can you remember from the interview as being very impressive for you?
The interview for a show that I was directing, which was based on the piece that he co-wrote with Peter Brook, because he worked a lot with theatre maker Peter Brook in Paris across the years. They went to India together and wrote the Mahabharata together, and they also adapted Bizet's Carmen. And so I went to talk to him about their experience and how they did it and how different it was from the regular opera world and all of this. And he struck, I mean, I knew of him and I knew his work before, but he's someone who's really crossed the whole 20th century in a way that took him to most countries in Europe and also outside Europe. So it felt like a perfect witness of that time, really, and of that European construction in the cultural world, artistic world. Yeah.
Was there a moment in this interview? I mean, I would be curious. You as an artist now, and he being an artist, like you say, during the whole 20th century. Was there a moment when you experienced really that there's a huge difference between the two of you?
The way he described his life was the way he started and everything. It just feels like he's been working with the most talented people ever and just met them from the start. So it was a sort of, and he describes it himself as a sort of series of lucky moments really in his life. So that felt, I sort of wished I could have lived through this. But he was really, it's listening to him. He's still working today, and he's still working with young directors and writing for them. And it didn't really feel like I was talking to an old man or someone belonging to an older time, or like an archive. I felt like I was just talking to a pair, really, or like a fellow artist. So that was really nice. Yeah, he gave me a few tips as well.
That's interesting. That art can, in some points, build bridges over generations or even ages. Because the question of arts maybe at some point never really changed. And so that's very interesting. And we'll come back to him in a moment. I'll ask Samuel, because what I just think of right now. I mean, we are in the heights of the Corona crisis, and when we're talking right now, and we talk a lot about the old generation now. I mean, and all the people we interview, I mean, they obviously all belong to this specific generation, the risk group, as they're called right now. And in the last weeks, I would say the whole public opinion, in some sense, has changed a little bit, and people are talking a bit more loosely about this generation, I have the feeling. So it's maybe also from this perspective that our interviews, or your interviews, have a specific importance, even right now in this moment. So how would you describe, first of all, your interview partner, and then also what would you say about the specific moment when we talk about this interview?
Yes, I interviewed Erna Hennico-Schöpfches. She's a politician and pianist born in 1941 in the south of Luxembourg. And she has quite an amazing career. She was the first chairwoman of the Chamber of Deputies in the 90s, as well as the first chairwoman of the Christian Social People's Party. And she was a member of several cabinets as a minister for education and culture. And that's only one pillar of biography. The second pillar is that she was educated as a musician. She was studying in Austria, Belgium, France, and Luxembourg. And I enjoyed talking to her because she didn't lose sight of one of those two pillars. She's a politician. She was very pragmatic in some ways, but she's also very fond of her cultural background. So it was nice to have an older person who is able to absorb the best of both spheres, the pragmatism of the politics and the idealism of culture. And that was quite amazing to see, because nowadays I have the feeling that it's often separated. The one talks about politics and the other one talks about culture, and it's hard to get them together.
Mm-hmm. And coming back to the question of right now, I mean, when you think about her right now, I mean, what is there? What would you say? What is the precious moment of the interview you conducted with her? Why is this important, basically?
Well, at first there was one biographical episode I liked a lot. She commuted as a teenage girl once a week to Brussels for her lessons as a pianist, and that was mid-50s. And nowadays, with our nomadic lifestyle, it's normal to cross the borders and to get into the TGV and travel from Paris to Berlin and to Oslo and back. But back then it wasn't. But the way she talked about it, it was just her opportunity, and she took it. And I liked a lot the pragmatism of how she conducted her life. And she didn't think it was something special. she created those opportunities and she took them. And I liked how she talked about that little episode of commuting to Brussels. The second thing I liked a lot was she quoted the French politician Robert Schuman, who gave a famous speech about Europe in 1950, saying, "Nous voulons unir des citoyens et non coaliser des États." In English, we want to unite citizens. We don't want to compound states. And I think that was a key sentence for her. It summed up the energy behind her engagement and how this engagement became necessarily European over the years. It started on a national scale and it grew to a European scale after a while.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for that, Simon. The passion basically for Europe, which also kind of drives us, is really to think it from the citizens, not from the institutions, not from the kind of economical structures, which we have to admit haven't been built from the ground up, but from the up to the bottom. So the voices of this European archive, in some sense, represent the citizens of Europe. Yeah, that's right. Thank you very much. So last but not least, I would ask Kristof to tell us a little bit about his experience with the interview partner he had. She was the first president of Iceland, and I think worldwide the first woman who was actually the leader of a state. Is that correct?
Yes, very much indeed, Simon. Well, first of all, hello everybody, and I'm happy to be here. Vigdis Finnbogadóttir. She was born in 1930 and was the first, to be absolutely correct, you would have to say she was the first female democratically elected president, or the first female democratically elected head of state, if you like. That, of course, alone makes her very interesting, and the name and she as a person has sort of always been with me. I grew up in the 1980s as a child in a German Icelandic family, and back then people didn't really know anything about Iceland. It was really sort of this obscure place up there on the edge of the map, and then Vigdis became president in 1980, and all of a sudden people realized that something was happening in Iceland, and she became a symbol not only for social progress in Iceland, but as I grew older, the more I realized that she actually was more than that. That she was a symbol for many other countries as well. That things are changing, and that always made her very interesting for me. And she also played a big role in international politics, because during her time she was actually in office for 16 years. And during that time, she hosted the summit of Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev in Reykjavik in 1986. And she also saw very controversial public debate about the question whether Iceland should join the European Union or not. So there were a lot of things happening during her time, which, of course, also made it very interesting to actually get to talk to her. And that's why I was very happy that she actually agreed.
If you look back in the interview, and how would you describe her view on Europe at this time? So what was actually the attraction she felt from this European community? You mentioned, I mean, she was really at the very decisive moment. Should we join or should we not? So what was the attraction for her? Was it political, economically, or cultural, first and foremost?
Well, at the time when the debate was really at the most controversial points, she, being the president, had to be sort of almost impartial, or at least the role of the president of Iceland is not a role to actually get involved in controversial debates, but more be in sort of moderating role. So back then she didn't really take a very stand. She wasn't very outspoken, but what she was in fact very outspoken about is that Europe for her had always been about culture. As I said, she was born in 1930, and when she was a little girl, she told me during the interview that she said to her parents that she wanted to be a captain of a ship. And they said to her, "Okay, well, that can never happen because you're a girl." And then 10 years later, she went as a young exchange student. Right after the Second World War in 1949, she went to France to study. And she was all into Sartre and Camus and Beauvoir and all of that. And I asked her how she had actually witnessed the first political beginnings of the European Union. And she said that wasn't something that people were interested in. People were interested in literature. People were interested in learning foreign languages. People were interested in culture. And that has always stayed with her as her key point of identification with the European Union, because she also worked before her presidency. She worked a lot in the cultural field. She translated plays and in literature, and she was the artistic director of the Reykjavik City Theatre. So basically, for her, it was always about culture.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. No, I mean, this somehow combines with what Samuel just said about his Europe witness, with the pragmatic and the idealistic part are not separated as we from time to time tend to think in our politicians. No, I mean, when we look at the debate right now about culture and we look for a politician who is representing culture, in Germany at least, we don't find that many. So that's very, very interesting. Thank you very much for this overview, and then maybe I can start with you, and we go back again the row, coming to a second theme which I'm interested in, which is a little bit more away from the European witnesses, but more asking you all as artists, writers, basically. So I mean, I'm an historian by training, and so for me the question of archive and the oral history has always been very intriguing and interesting. You know, how can you imagine history by looking at people's thoughts, you know, and what can we do also as time witnesses, basically, to collect something for future generations to look back. But I want to ask you specifically now as writers, and maybe I start again with you, Kristof, since you have also, I know that in your writing, the theme of the archive is playing a big role. So how would you describe your relationship as a writer with voices from the past, or in general, archives?
Well, you know, I thought about this a lot when I was thinking of whether I wanted to participate in creating this European archive of voices. I was thinking about what I was hoping, because of course it's a nice idea that's pretty obvious to everybody, but I was always wondering how it can be more than just that. And archives for me, well, they always used to show who was in power, because whoever was in power had the authority to determine what was worthy enough to be preserved in an archive and what was not. So power creates knowledge, of course, and knowledge also creates power. But that's just the way it used to be. What I found thrilling about the project European Archive of Voices is that now, in our days, we can actually create our own archive, and an archive that, what I found very fascinating, will document the ideas and probably also ideals that people had about Europe, people who were born in the first half of the 20th century, and also something that will enable us today to exchange our ideas of how we want Europe to be in the future. Because if we all just sit at home and muse quietly about what Europe means to us, nothing will ever happen, and there will never be any kind of common European spirit. But if we want to create that spirit, we have to exchange our ideas. And I'm hoping that the archive can not just preserve whatever was in the past, but that it can also create the sort of space where actually people can exchange their ideas about future Europe.
We're half an hour in.
So when I just ask one question with this, I mean, you said power creates knowledge. That is obviously true. How do you reflect as you as a writer, basically, in this question? I mean, you as a writer in general also have the power to give voices to people in a broader sense, you know. I mean, when you just finished your last novel, how do you think about this problem? You as a writer now, maybe put aside a little bit the archive question, but the experiences you get in your life, they come into books, and then out of this, what happens with this, basically?
Well, I'm actually pretty happy with that, because it to me it shows that writing actually has an effect on people, and it always had a strong influence on me as a reader, and to be able to do that as a writer and to contribute a bit to telling stories that change our view of the world has always been important to me, because when people talk about the role that writers can play in political life, they tend to focus on language very, very quickly and say, well, we can criticize when people use derogatory language and problematic, politically incorrect things. That's all good. But what I think is the most vital role that literature can play when it comes to being influential, that's that we can tell stories that enable our readers to actually change perspective. And if we want to get together and come together as a society and fight against divisive tendencies in society, I think that's the most important thing, that all of us actually learn to put ourselves into other people's shoes and change perspectives. And that's what I think is most important for me when I write, this change of perspective.
Very good. Thank you very much, Kristof, for this. And I turn over to Samuel exactly with this. I mean, do you agree basically with this role of the author? And do you feel also that it's your position when you're writing to give people the possibility to change perspectives through your writing?
Yes, I think I studied a history as well, so I think I have those two components in me. In me, on the one hand, it's about imagination, and on the other hand, it's about getting the things that are out in the world as facts, as fictions, into the book, into the text, in a way that another person can understand those informations and use them for him or herself. I think the idea of literary texts that can bridge something, that can be intersubjective, is quite important. And while thinking about the project, I was reminded of a novel I read one year ago. It's called Die Untergründung Amerikas by Francis Nennick, and it's a really mazed text, but in its center, it's really about archives and how an archive helps us to shape and misshape the way we look at the world. And it's a really, really clever text, and I think it fits perfectly into our project, because it's a clever text. It doesn't take the easy way out by stating this is the past, those are the documents, and these are the people you need to focus on. Only one thing is certain: how easy it actually is to get lost while working in archives. There's just too much of it, too much information, too much voices, too many texts, and the main character in the novel needs to develop some skills that help her keeping afloat, so she can maneuver through all the data. And I think it's quite the same with our archive. It's about developing skills that help us to analyze and link different experiences, backgrounds, and perspectives that were made on this continent, and put them together in one mobile yet stable device of knowledge. So the Spanish people can read it, the interview about Luxembourgish people, and they feel there's something in common. And I think that was, for me as a historian and as well as a writer, quite an important experience.
That's very fascinating. Die Untergründung, how would you translate that? The underlying founding. Yeah. Like, it's a very, very great word. Can you say again the title and the author of this?
Die Untergründung Amerikas, and the author is called Francis Nenig.
Okay, yeah, we have to look into this, but I really like the word, because I really have to say this is really. Yeah, I mean, maybe this is exactly the word which fits to what we're doing. I mean, Europe has been founded, obviously, before us. But I mean, personally, my driving force was always, we can't just accept or passively live in this. We have to do something to keep it alive and to refound it, basically, and I always was thrilled by the idea, to exactly what you described, to collect data, to collect voices and stories. I mean, what Kristof just said about literature. I mean, you can also put this to the interviews. I mean, in all of these interviews, I would say there's a story. You can make all of these interviews to a story. And then the interesting part is also that we now ask questions about these people, but maybe in 200 or 300 years, people will even ask different questions to the material we have. And this is what also makes it so fascinating for historians. Okay, thank you very much, Samuel. And I will go on to Jeanne, and I want to ask her specifically about her view on the archive problem. I mean, I know for example, as an opera director, you have a lot to do with the canon, and also with what has been accepted as being canonized. And in the world of music, there certain decision has been taken. But how important is it for you as an artist, as an opera director, to also have your own view on the material? So that it's not just about the big 10 composers everyone knows, but also do you feel a responsibility to also discover maybe material which hasn't been discovered yet, basically, as an artist, basically?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of meets the point you were making about this idea of refounding things, refounding all those arts, because I mean, the writer, as the director, as any person interested in making art, is in some sense an archivist. And with opera, it's even more, in fact, or theatre, it's more obvious, because you have to deal with those classics, with what is considered the archive with a big A, and sort of maybe in fact discover people who were never listened to or forgotten, or for some reason disappeared from the big archive. But yeah, and I find that word also, because of my training, because of what I did before. The archive origin is sort of this 19th century idea where you go to this massive place of papers and things and just lose yourself in it, and in a way you lose yourself in it to just find the story you want, and to find the story you're going to refound and reinvent in your work, whether you're a historian or a writer. And I find this sort of Arbeit in Europa process wonderful, because of all these stories meeting each other, and also thinking about, I mean, those people are very grand people and very inspiring, but that just is this idea of archiving maybe sort of more hidden things, hidden lives, or people who don't necessarily have a voice, like this writer Pierre Michon, who writes about Vie minuscule, which is sort of, he's suddenly archiving a whole range of people who would never have made it into the archive. So yeah, I just find this idea of the role of the archivist basically is very interesting to me.
I mean, it's funny that you say that, because to talk a little bit off records, basically, people, in the archive, in these 50 people, there are obviously a lot of people who are not famous at all, who are not renowned, but we always ask our young interviews in the countries to, propose someone, and, someone proposed someone who worked in a factory as in a leading role, but in a factory, So, and when he looked at the other names on the list or on the website, and he saw, for example, Carrière, he was like, "Oh, I can't be in this, I can't be next to Carrière," because he knew him for some reason. And then we had to tell him that it's not about the famous, it's not about the fame of a person, What Carrière says is also very much about his life. So it's the individual we are interested in. It's not about the VIP factor in there. And so, that's what it's obviously we could do 50 more interviews to have a better diversity, as we would say in our times. But I think really the mixture is already very, very thrilling to see that there are these minuscule things in all of biographies, basically.
And this performance dimension as well. How do you perform? As a director, how do you perform an archive, and how do you make it alive? How do you connect archives and those stories and everything? Our questions are, really key in this work.
Yeah, I like very much that you also emphasize the vivid moment of the archive. So it's not the 19th century image of the archive where you have like big dark halls of paper where people go to, but the archive in the 21st century, and what we do now as well, is to bring the moment or the sentiment of the archive also to life, and to confront it with communication. This is what Kristof said in the beginning, and what Samuel also hinted to, that it's about communication, imagination, communication. These are the two key moments, basically, when we talk about archives today. Thank you very much, Jeanne. We'll come back to you once more, but now we go to Erle, and I want to specifically ask Erle as well, because you, when I understood correctly in your book about the Norwegians during the Second World War in Berlin, you worked with archive sources, basically, but then you also obviously had to use fiction to put them together. Or how did you actually experience this question of fiction versus non-fiction in your writing?
I wrote a non-fiction book, so there's no fiction in it, but it's really hard to make an interesting story for someone to read without any kind of making up of stuff. So that was one of the hardest things about writing that book. But I have to tell you that I have a historian friend and a writer, and I told him about this new project of mine, and he said, then you have to bury yourself down in the archives and stay there for 3 weeks. And I thought, oh no, that sounds so boring, because I'm not a historian. I had never been to archives a lot, and I thought of them as this dusty old papers with just not interesting. But then you start to search and you find stuff, and it's like a treasure hunt, and everything I could find, and you just get a new folder, and there may be something revolutionary for my story in this old paper. And I also rebelled that first time I saw one of the person I'm writing about, I got a paper in the archive with his Unterschrift, his signature, and it's almost magic to me. I felt so close to this man who died in the 70s, and all of a sudden it was like he came alive a bit, and that's a bit what we are doing too. The way I since I'm writing nonfiction, it was very important for me that everything that stood in the book was true. But then you have to go to so many sources and archives, just to know what kind of weather was it that day. So I got a lot of help from the German meteorological institution, just writing to them and asking how was the weather in Berlin in the 2nd of March 1944, and they told me. And then I could write that it was a sunny day, he was going out, and like, so we have to do all this kind of, and what I realized was that the material, what we have as a historical material outside, like, it's so vast, it's so much, it's just a way to think how to use it, and then you can actually find so much, and you don't have to make up anything. And also, the same friend of mine, he told me, use pictures. Think about all the material that is in pictures. And there's always a lot of old pictures out there. So I was very clear about seeing what are the details in the pictures, how are they interacting, what are they wearing. That's a lot of interesting information in that too.
45 minutes in.
And can you imagine that maybe in 200 years a young woman is interested in Norwegian history and comes across your interview and uses this interview for something?
Well, wouldn't that be just the most beautiful thing? I mean, yeah, that would have been fantastic. But at least you feel like you're kind of doing something historically relevant, while recording all these voices. And also the point about having it live and as a recording, I think makes it something special.
Yeah, that's a very important point. What you make, we don't have the interviews only in writing, but we also have the voices. It's the European Archive of Voices to exactly emphasize this aura moment, the aura of the voices. Not so much only about really detailing, understanding the details of the conversation. That's also very interesting in some parts, but it's also sometimes very interesting or enriching to just hear the richness of the voices of Europe. So we come to the third and last round of our little discussion, and I start with Erle because she has the right cloth on for this question. I think Erle, we in the introduction, Jannica said we are celebrating Europe today. I mean, on the climax of a huge crisis, a worldwide crisis, but also a European crisis. Obviously, first and foremost, a health crisis, but then it can also be very, very severely, I fear, a European crisis in terms of how we look at the countries, the states, and the question of why should we actually be together anymore? Not. I mean, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, said that this is really the decisive moment for Europe if we stay together or if we fall apart right now. So, but in spite of all this, how would you now, to our viewers, how would you say, why should we celebrate Europe in this moment particularly? What would be your answer to the question, why do we celebrate, should we believe in Europe, basically?
Well, I think that this crisis shows more than any time before how much we need to cooperate. I mean, the way like Germans have had patients flown in from France and sent doctors to Italy. It's just one of those places you should see how important the cooperation is. And I think it's also during this crisis, we understand a bit more and more how close we are. I mean, China was far away, but when something's happened in France or in Germany and or in Norway, it's so close. And you actually realize now when we can't even get on a plane, we understand we can actually drive. We can even almost walk. I feel in some way that we're even closer than before, because you can't go to New York, but soon you can like actually just walk across the border to Belgium, or maybe not Belgium, but Poland, and we need to cooperate now more than any time. And at the same time, Norway is not a part of the EU, but we still very strongly feel this community, and I think we're always competing with Sweden. So now it's a big who's having the best solution to the crisis. Sweden's model or Norway's model, and but this is also kind of shows the love, kind of the countries. It's like your brother and sister. You're always quarreling a bit, but you love each other. And I feel like everyone was very focused on their own country in the start, but now I feel it's going people are saying, "Oh, Europe, we have to open up Europe a bit." And I feel hopeful now that we actually can get something good out of this.
Thank you very much, Jeanne, for this faithful words. And now we come to Jeanne, who's in the UK right now. I mean, obviously a country which has its problems with the European idea. But you, as a French citizen and European citizen, how would you say, why should we celebrate Europe today?
Well, I think it's just to follow what Erle was saying. Is this? It is true. There's a sense of common enemy now, which could be a helpful thing to get people together on the same page. Even maybe possibly the UK, although they're really doing their own thing. And it's been interesting actually to compare the ways what I hear from what's happening in France or Germany or Italy, as opposed to the ways in which people think about this whole situation in the UK. But I mean, I would say it's even more. It's a sort of European challenge, really. I'm talking really from the sort of artistic scene point of view, which I have most of my friends who I've been working with, singers, directors, performers, or having to probably find new ways of thinking about performance, about the art, and I think that's something that that European countries can really do together and unite to find new bridges and new ways, whether they are new meeting places, whichever they are, whether they're virtual or not. But it definitely calls for celebration, for staying united, for sure. Yeah.
In times of crisis, the power, for example, of music is even stronger maybe than in times of, relaxation. So this is also why we need maybe even more music right now. Thank you very much.
Everyone is producing things and it keeps going, for sure. So I think, it might produce something very wonderful, I hope. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jeanne. Samuel, coming back to you. I mean, also you're coming from, one of the founding countries of this European idea, the European Union idea, we can say. I mean, we always differentiate between the European idea we look at in the archive or with our association. But for you personally, how do you feel right now about Europe? Are you more pessimistic or more optimistic?
I fear I'm a pessimistic character, so I'm probably a bit more pessimistic than Jeanne or Erle. But what I think is quite interesting when I talk to people with my parents or friends that are sitting in Luxembourg, I get the sense that they are, even more than Germans or French people, they are offended that the borders are closed. And I think it's really offended. They are like, what the fuck, how can this happen? And I think it's quite an interesting reaction, because Luxembourg's self-image cares a lot about openness and mobility and internationality. And I think the dynamics of the last weeks showed many Luxembourgers quite plainly how dependent that identity is from engaging constantly with their neighbors. And I think by getting a negative experience, they get a better feeling of the implicitness of their identity. They think it's normal to cross the borders, to go to Trier or to Paris or to Strasbourg. And I think this implicitness, which should always be, there should be a background that it's a privilege to have those things. And by getting a feeling that those privileges can be restricted, it helps the people to engage more positively to the European idea.
Thank you. That's very interesting. And I turn right away to Kristof and ask: do you also have do you share this view that right now people may, in this time of crisis, may acknowledge a little bit more the privileges they had before? Is that a future perspective you also share?
5 minutes to go, maybe 6.
Well, they may. I think you could definitely say that, because I think at this early stage, it's really too early to say what's going to happen. And just like in the financial crisis, I see a lot of utopian and dystopian versions of the European future that are all talked about right now. And I don't think we can say at this early stage what's going to happen. But I think definitely that people will appreciate open borders and the liberty to travel whenever they want to other countries without even having to take their ID. People will definitely appreciate that more now that it has been temporarily taken away from them. I think a lot of things will be decided when we see how European countries manage to support each other, not only by taking a few patients into the hospitals, but by supporting themselves or supporting each other during the recovery process of the economy. I think that's what's going to be the real crucial point. And a long recession may even kill more people than the actual disease has killed. So I think that's what's going to be the decisive point. But if I can add one more thing, I think it's important not so much how optimistic or pessimistic we are, but that we find a way how to talk about the problems that the European Union is facing without being overly alarmistic, because I think we are all a little spoiled by the 90s and by the early 2000 years when we thought that, okay, we don't really have to do anything. Progress will just happen like this automatically, and Europe will be growing closer and closer together, and there's nothing we have to do. It's just it'll just be that way. Now we have realized that we actually have to fight for our ideas of Europe, and I don't think we should see that. We should see that as an exceptional phase. I think we should accept that this is normal. Ideas of liberalism and ideas of a cosmopolitan, open society have always been under siege and have always been challenged. And that's the way it's going to be. Maybe the 90s were a bit of an exception, but now that we realize that this is the end of history, we can all relax a little and just talk about the problems as something that can actually be solved, and not something that has unjustly come upon us and is just a big catastrophe. I think that's what I should say that we should focus on right now, and then we'll see if the utopian or dystopian things will actually come into reality. Probably something in between, but well, we'll see.
I see the playwright here who's obviously interested in conflict and fights and constant fights of idea, and I really like this idea that Europe is not something stable.
You can't even see all the movements I'm doing because it's out of the camera. That would be
exactly. Yeah. Perfect. So we are looking forward to a new play from you, Kristof, who's tackling this question. So thank you very, very much to all of you for your time and for your thoughts, for giving us an insight in your interviews, and also what you think about the project in general, and what you think about archives from the point of view, from the artistic point of view, maybe, and then in the end also how this European moment can be evaluated from your different perspectives. So I feel very happy that we, in some sense, also we are a part in this hour. We have a sense of community, through talking and through debating, and this is probably also what Europe is about. It's a hub of debate over borders, and it will never stop. That we will talk to each other. The communication and the imagination is maybe what is really the founding moment for our refounding, unsere Untergründung from Europe. So thank you very much, and I hope that we will now listen in the end, or now next to this, will be two statements also from our members of our Arbeit an Europa association. First, Nora Besson, who was one of the founding founding mothers of Arbeit an Europa, and she will have a short statement to Europe, and then Tom Müller, another member of our association, will also have a short say to Europe. So this will come up, and then I would ask you to stay tuned, because 8:15 there then will start the next stream with the digital walk through the Literaturhaus and the Thomas Köck reading. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you very much for your time, and let's hope for Europe. Ciao.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Hallo, ich bin Nora Besson, Gründungsmitglied von Arbeit an Europa, und ich freue mich, dass wir heute unsere Projekte ein bisschen vorstellen können. Ich glaube, wir erleben gerade jetzt in der Zeit, in der Grenzen wieder geschlossen werden, in der vielleicht der ein oder die andere ein bisschen mehr in nationalistischen Grenzen und Größen denkt, noch einmal, wie wichtig eigentlich das Projekt Europa ist, wie wichtig das Projekt der Europäischen Union nach wie vor ist, und dass es ein Projekt ist, was stetig in Bewegung ist. Es ist nichts ganz Feststehendes, sondern ein Organismus, der wächst und wandelt. Und das Archiv der Stimmen, das wir derzeit erarbeiten, zeigt es, glaube ich, ganz gut. Da bringen wir junge Menschen mit sogenannten Zeitzeugen, das sind natürlich alle Zeugen unserer Zeit, Menschen, die um 1940 oder etwas früher geboren sind, zusammen, die von ihrer Idee von Europa erzählen. Und so haben wir einfach zwei Perspektiven, zwei ganz unterschiedliche Generationen, die auf diesen Kontinent, auf dieses Friedensprojekt schauen. Und ich glaube, das kann man nicht oft genug betonen, dass es ein Friedensprojekt ist und dass dieses Friedensprojekt nach wie vor wichtig ist. Denn auch wenn wir, die jüngere Generation, glücklicherweise fast ausnahmslos in Friedenszeiten aufgewachsen ist, bemerken wir jetzt, dass die Bedrohungen da sind und dass auch wir nicht nur in einer Wohlstandskapsel leben und nicht von allen Gefahren gefeit sind. Ich glaube, dass die Aufgaben, die wir jetzt sehen, deutlich machen, dass nur Zusammenarbeit und Solidarität eigentlich eine Antwort bringen können. Und ich freue mich, wenn Sie Gefallen finden an den Ideen, die wir zusammen umsetzen.
Hallo, mein Name ist Tom Müller, ich bin Autor und Leiter des Tropenverlages in Berlin. Ich bin auch Mitglied bei Arbeit in Europa und möchte gerne am heutigen Europatag ein paar Gedanken mit Ihnen teilen. Für mich bedeutet Europa immer Freiheit, aber nicht die einfache Freiheit des Reisens, des in ein Flugzeug steigens, um sich die nötige Wellness in möglichst kurzer Zeit abgreifen zu können. Nein, für mich bedeutet Europa immer eine Freiheit des Denkens. Ich bin 1982 in Friedrichshain geboren worden und dann 1995 in Westberlin, in Neukölln, auf ein Gymnasium gegangen. Und vielleicht können Sie sich vorstellen, wie stark kontrastiert die beiden Welten waren, die da aufeinander geprallt sind. Welche Denkmuster, welche Sozialisierungen dort aufeinander geprallt sind. Und als junger Mensch ist man natürlich dort auch nicht so frei, diese einfach zu wechseln. Und für mich war es eine ganz besondere Sache, dass unsere Schule es organisiert hat, dass wir nach Italien gegangen sind, um uns dort auszutauschen mit Italienerinnen und Italienern. Und das dann in fortlaufender Folge. Dieser Austausch mit Italien, das war die Freiheit, das war die Möglichkeit, eben nicht nur das Denken, das hier verbreitet und sich durchgesetzt hatte, zur Auswahl zu haben, sondern auch ein anderes, eines, das aus anderen Kulturen, aus anderen Denkmustern geprägt war. Und wenn heute Europa und Krise zu häufig in einem Satz erwähnt werden, dann liegt das wahrscheinlich auch daran, dass wir das oberste Gebot aus Giovanni Boccaccos Decameron, nämlich dass Krise bedeutet, sich austauschen zu müssen, dass wir dieses Gebot nicht mehr beachten. Ich mache einen kleinen Sprung zurück. Im Decameron tauschen sich eben in ihrer kleinen, illustren Gesellschaft nicht dieselben Menschen einer Blase aus und versuchen, eine neue Welt zu schaffen, neue Regeln zu definieren für die Welt nach der Pest. Nein, dort sind es Adlige, Aristokraten und einfache Leute, die sich auf ein Landhaus zurückziehen, um dann Decameron 10 Tage lang die Regeln einer möglichen anderen Welt zu verhandeln. Und witzigerweise war es ja auch genau so im Jahr 1989-90, als im Zuge der Maueröffnung am runden Tisch dann alle Teile der Gesellschaft zusammengesessen haben, um die damals noch beabsichtigte neue Verfassung für das vereinigte Deutschland auszuhandeln. Selbst der Schriftsteller Bernhard Schlink auf der einen Seite und die Bürgerrechte der DDR auf der anderen Seite, um nur 2 von all denen zu nennen. Und das wird heutzutage, glaube ich, oft vergessen, dass diese Art von Freiheit, nämlich die Freiheit, dass das Denken nicht alternativlos ist, dass nicht durchregiert werden kann, auf diese Freiheit zurückzukommen. Das, glaube ich, ist der Kern Europas, nämlich der Austausch der Kultur- und Denktraditionen und ihre gegenseitige Befruchtung. Und deshalb engagiere ich mich auch unter anderem bei Arbeit in Europa, wo wir versuchen, genau diesen Austausch zu fördern.